Everybody, it's Anthony Brogdon, and I got a lady on the channel today that I'm super excited she here. I met this sister, and she jamming. She came to my town, Detroit, right? And she was at the library. She did a book signing and presentation. And I got that right. Ooh, man, you don't know this story. Most of y'all don't know this story. This is about an icon that we all know about her, but we didn't know she did it. I'm only giving you a tip to lead into it as we talk about it. It's mind-blowing stuff in Black history. It's good Black history. This is what I talk about here. And I'm a better person as a result of the people who come on the show like this lady. Man, I have learned so much. And I'm 4 years into it and growing. I'm gonna do this till the day it ends, the day I end, because I'm enjoying this. This has gotten good. So hit the subscribe button on Strong Inspirations. It don't cost nothing. This is Black history that's free. You watch it in them schools and them classrooms, and I get a message every now and then. You can move the cursor, get past me. Find out what you want the students to hear and get to it. It's time slapping. It's YouTube. It's up forever. And then hit the notifications bell. So you get a ding, a shock, a smoke signal, something to let you know there is new content. I'm putting out 1 or 2 a week. The train has left the station. And with this lady, I know I'm on to something. Let me tell you something. I'm interviewing her, and I interviewed her husband, who he's a prolific historian. He's jamming too. I know when they get home, they be trying to outdo each other with Black history facts. Because they're good. I love it. And hit the note, hit the like on this one. You're gonna like this sister. Oh man, she good. And because there's no love button. So do that, my friends. Did you see the one I did? Check out. Look for the one I did with Samuel Black. He's in that Heights Museum in Pittsburgh. He leading that situation there. He's the foremost historian on those grounds. Watch that video. There's another one out of Pittsburgh. I want to say it's out of Pittsburgh, but I might be wrong. But out of Louisville, I interviewed the lady that talks about the first Black library ran by Black people. It's in Louisville. Louisville, all places. Watch that video. I interviewed a guy out of St. John who his great-great-grandfather was enslaved on this plantation. They own it now, and it's a tourist attraction. They built a restaurant, and it's on top of a hill. You see all the Atlantic Ocean in St. John. Go there. His name, oh shucks, I can't think of his name, but go watch. Just go to the videos. You'll see it. And look at the one I did with the white guy out of Scotland who found out that his great-great-grandfather was the largest enslaver in Barbados. Watch that video. Or the one I did with the guy out of Arkansas who found out that his grandfather, who he was very close with, was in the KKK and killed the guy. And when he found this out, he said, I never really spoke to him again. I couldn't forgive him for what he did. Watch, see, it's all over the country. I get it from all over the world. And so do that, my friends. A couple housekeeping. As you may know, I'm a filmmaker, everybody. Business in the Black, The Rise of Black Business in America is a documentary that toured to over 40 cities across America, including Pittsburgh. I was in Pittsburgh showing this. And it's streaming on Amazon. I went one step further and I wrote what I say. No, I ain't gonna say that. That don't sound right. Others say is America's #1 Black business history book. Very comprehensive and thorough. Business history, because her book is #1 on what it's gonna talk about. Y'all gonna love this. So I ain't superseding that one by no stretch. But Black business history, slaves who own businesses. I got 30 of them in here. Get you a copy of this. It's available on my website. businessintheblack.net, and then you can hear where I'm speaking because I just left Harlem, New York. I spoke at the Y. I killed them in the Y. They had to shut the lights down. We got to get out of here. This man got to go. We've had enough.
Mhm.
And then I'm in Philadelphia in 2 weeks. How about this? I'm having my own festival in conjunction with the Black History Museum in Mount Bayou, Mississippi. That's July 10, 11, 12, 13. It's their Founders Day, founded in 1887. We're gonna have symposiums and lunch and speakers. I'm speaking, book signing, all that. And we're gonna party in a barn on Friday night, drink some moonshine. I'm gonna do my two-step on them in Mount Bayou, Mississippi. You got to come see this two-step. All that is on my website, businessintheblack.net. Now you hear me use this term strong. Strong is my favorite word. In my world, strong stands for strength, tenacity, resilience, and a sense of oneness, nobility, and grace. And that is my introduction to the lovely lady on the channel today. Come on, sister. Thank you for being on here. Tell us your name. Let's get it on.
Good morning, Anthony. Thank you so much for having me. My name is Dr. Etta Fields Black. I'm a professor at Carnegie Mellon University. I teach the history of West Africa, pre-colonial Africa, and the African diaspora. And I'm here today to talk about my new book, Combahee, Harriet Tubman, The Combahee River Raid, and Black Freedom During the Civil War.
Oh my God. Yeah, this is serious. Okay, and I'm gonna get serious with y'all because I got a serious lady over here. Now, how about this? Let's get the audience to know you a little bit. Where were you born and raised?
I was born and raised in Miami, Florida. So I am a grandchild of the Great Migration. My father was the last of his siblings born in the South Carolina and Georgia Low Country, a few miles from where the Combahee River Raid took place. And his parents, my grandparents, migrated from Green Pond, South Carolina to Charleston and then to Miami. And my mother's family were Bahamian immigrants. And so my great grandparents came as a young married couple. They left the Bahamas and went to Florida, first to Key West and had two children, and then up to Miami and had, I think, five more in Miami. So a child of immigrants and migrants,
Oh, I
grandchild.
got it. So now, where you grew up, was it? You said in Miami. Was it in the black part of Miami, the black, community area? What was that like?
Yes, I grew up in Brownsville, which is kind of central city, considered the northwest section, but it's not that far north.
Yeah, yeah.
And when my mother's family moved, they moved from Overtown, which was the black section of town right adjacent to downtown. And they moved out to what was then the suburbs to Brownsville. They bought a couple of blocks of property. And so they built their houses right next door to each other.
Hmm.
So I grew up with my grandmother's house next door in the back. And then in the front was my mother's uncle. On the side were my mother's uncles and aunts. So we were all in a compound there in Miami.
That's before you moved there though, and being in the city, was that the hood? You know what I mean? And did
By
you
the
got you know hood stuff like that?
By the time I was born, and by the time I was growing up, yes, it was the hood.
Yeah. Growing up in the hood, where did the white people live?
Mostly north or south of us. So we're kind of in the center, and
Yeah.
then Miami just sprawled to the north, going, say, North Miami Beach, Aventura, Miami Lakes, and then to the south, Kendall, Key Biscayne, Coconut Grove, South Miami, Coral Gables, all of those areas.
Yeah.
So Brownsville and Liberty City and Little Haiti, we were sort of the black sections in the middle.
When what did they tell you don't go to where the white people live? was there something to that, or be careful, or that's where you had to go do your shopping?
That's where you had to go to do your shopping, to go to the store, to go
Yeah,
to the mall, not necessarily the grocery store.
yeah.
And I went to school. I always went to private school. So
Oh,
I
okay,
didn't go to public school. So I had to go, my father bust us every
okay.
day. Dad drove us to and from school. So we went to school in those areas.
Okay. Let me ask you this. When you and I'm taking liberties here to say that sounds like some privilege. I mean, so it wasn't so bad. Dad took you private school, you got to pay for it, what have you. I want to go down this road just a second. When you do that, how do the kids in the neighborhood respond to you? Are you goody two shoes? Do they want to beat you up for you not hanging? And then I know you probably got good grades, so now you a smarty pants. How does that feel?
Well, unfortunately, there really weren't any kids in our neighborhood because we were surrounded by my mother's aunts and uncles, right? So we were surrounded by our elders, which was a wonderful thing. Um, and the kids we played with were mainly our cousins who came to visit their grandparents. Um, so in the community, in church, yes, I did get teased.
Is that right? But
I did.
and isn't that a part of our history though? On one hand, do we want each other to succeed and starting at a young age, we or some of us do and some of us don't? What is that dynamic? Even going back, if you could kind of put some historical spin on it.
Yeah. I think it is part of our culture. I think that I don't know, if you think about slavery, there was always a scarcity of resources, and planters, enslavers kind of doled out. It wasn't even privilege. It was, little bits of, um, I don't want to call it privilege because it wasn't even that much,
Right.
but they would dole out and try to separate people. So, oh, if you work in the house or if you have this occupation, you get to wear shoes and the field hands don't, that kind of thing. Or you get to eat table scraps and they don't. And so I think that kind of divide and conquer. And what that breeds is a kind of competition and a I can't think of the word, but basically people feeling as if they're competing for scarce resources, and
Yeah.
the only way they can get them is by knocking somebody else down. Um, and I think we should try to teach our children differently. I really
Yeah.
do. That we
Yeah.
want someone to succeed. We want people to achieve whatever they aspire to.
Yeah.
That it doesn't mean that one person is better than the other,
Right.
right? It
Right.
just means that they have a different goal than you do, and they might be working in a different way to achieve it.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I've spoken into some schools a couple of times here in Detroit, and I remember distinctly this one young lady. She didn't say nothing the whole time I was there. All the other kids goofing off, so on and so forth. And then at the end, I said, "Which of you all are going to be the one to succeed?" And they pointed to that girl. And even at that moment, she couldn't look. She looked at me with a twinkle in her eye, but she couldn't
Hmm.
say anything because of maybe the retribution of all the others.
Hmm.
Um, but growing up as you did, you had that insulation of the family, so
Yeah.
they talked you into getting good grades and
Yep.
going on and that kind of thing. There,
Yep. I knew that that was what was expected of me. So, the other kids could say
right,
whatever
right,
they said, but
right.
I knew where my support system was, and I knew that my family had certain expectations,
Right.
and if I didn't do what I was supposed to do, then I was going to be in trouble. So
Yeah,
that
yeah.
was my focus.
But the good, I guess the other part of that is as you had that uh where did that come from in your family? Was it can you single out a great great grandfather that he got an education, or he made some strides going back to on the plantation,
Hmm.
and I suspect you know where the plantation is in your family, so on and so forth.
Well, for my mother's family, we don't. And this is the family from the Bahamas. But when my one of the reasons why my great grandparents came uh, or left was so that their children could be educated. And all of their children, these are my grandmother and her brothers and sisters, they all graduated from college. My
Oh,
grandmother's born in 1909, so
wow,
I'm going back, right?
wow.
And most of them had, all except one, I think, had graduate or professional degrees.
Oh,
So I got that from my grandmother and that generation. And I'm
oh,
surrounded by that generation. I knew them very, very well. They lived next door to me. They took care of me.
I love it.
Mom and dad are going to a dinner dance. Boom. We're at our grandmother's house or we're at our aunt's house. If our grandmother had to go somewhere, she might have been going to the dinner dance also. So
Yeah, yeah, I love
I
it.
was
I love it.
surrounded by this, and I can think of we had two uncles that one was the family patriarch. He was the oldest. And so everybody looked up to him and everybody listened to him. He was literally the head of the family and he was directing everybody and
Okay,
supporting everybody.
okay,
But then the youngest, and our oldest, the family patriarch was a radiologist. He was one of the first Black radiologists in Florida. Um,
uh,
and then the youngest was a judge. And something that Uncle John, the youngest, said, and I heard him say it, and then I heard my mother say it, and it's so deeply ingrained in me. I say it to my children now. I don't know that they're listening, but I hope they are, which is from those to whom much is given, much will be required, right? I grew up with that you do have a certain amount of privilege, right? But it's not for you, it is to serve other people, right? You have your job, the reason why you've been put in this position, the reason why you're being given this education is to serve, right? It's not to accumulate for yourself. My mother would say you can only drive one car at a time. You can only wear one pair of shoes at a time. This is not for you.
man,
You have to help everybody else. You
I
have to
love it.
help those who are not at the table. You have to if you're sitting at the table, you represent the people who are not at the table. You're not there for yourself. You're not there to just take as much as you can take for you
Yeah,
and for your little family. It's for
yeah. I
everybody.
love it. I love it. Let me ask you this then. Have you growing up or and in your family, is there something that white people did to you, or was there a moment where like when you were in school, you getting all these A's and the white teacher did something so that you wouldn't be class valedictorian and the white girl did? You know what I mean? Let's start there. Was there any trauma?
Yeah. I don't remember that. What I remember is, and I talked to my children about this, I remember being one of the few only Black girls in the class. And I remember Black History Month or Martin Luther King Day or whatever. And the white teacher expects me or my sister to sing a spiritual at the assembly in front of all the white kids.
Ah,
And I can remember refusing. We didn't want to do it, right?
uh,
And then we got in trouble at home for not doing it.
yeah, I
So
was gonna ask you. Yeah, how did that play out?
my
Yeah.
sister and I were really the first to go to integrated schools, right? And so our parents didn't understand that experience. They didn't understand what we were going through in school with those white
Yes.
kids
Yes.
and what we went through with the black kids, right?
Yes.
We were getting it from both sides. And then you come home. We can't, okay, I'm gonna speak for myself. I come
Yes.
home and I'm
Yes.
not black enough, right?
Oh, yes. Yes.
So it was coming, and I'll give you an example because our kids now are in private school. And I remember at one point I was in college asking my mother, Mommy, do I have to teach these white people all the time? I'm in college. Mom said yes. And when my children asked me a similar question, I
Yeah.
said, no, you don't have to teach them white people.
Yep.
That's
Yep.
not
Yep.
that's not your job, right? Your job is to be a little black girl who is 14 years old and she's just doing her thing. She's
Yes.
coming into
Yes.
her own.
Sure.
They need to be, that school, they need to be offering classes. The teachers need to be teaching. The librarian needs to be
Sure.
teaching.
Sure. Sure.
You know,
Sure.
they can bring me in, I'll teach. That's not
Yes.
your job. That's not your responsibility. It's a lot of pressure.
Yeah, I was going to say, yeah, that's got to be added pressure
It's a lot of pressure.
in that regard. Um, but then, how do you get to? Well, okay, hold on. I'm gonna get to some more story. Did you ever think white people were better than black people?
I don't know that I thought that. I can say that I thought, I can say that I thought, mm, I can say that I wanted to have lighter skin.
Oh,
I
yes.
can say
Okay.
that. I
Yeah, I
can
got
say
you
that
there.
I wanted to have, I was always told I had very nappy hair, that I wanted to have straighter hair.
Oh, yes,
And
yes,
I
yes,
had the nappiest hair in the family.
yes, yes. All right, I'm
And it
with
was
you.
so hard to comb that,
Yes,
my mother went to great lengths to straighten
yes,
it. And I remember, because remember, I'm in Miami.
yes, right.
So my classmates, most of them were not white, most of them were Hispanic. The overwhelming majority of the girls I went to school with are from all over Latin America and the Caribbean, Cuba, right? So it was a different dynamic. The girls who were Anglo, as they were called, and the girls who were Jewish were, in many cases, a smaller minority than the black girls. And the black girls were African American and Caribbean, Jamaican, Bahamian, Haitian,
Mhm. I
right?
got you.
So the diversity was, we had everything
I
in
got you.
Miami. Not, I don't remember any continental Africans. We didn't have any people from the continent,
Yeah, sure.
but from every part of, and you had a
Sure.
lot of Afro-Cuban and Afro this and Afro that who didn't necessarily identify with their blackness.
Oh,
So the whole skin and hair thing took on a
oh,
slightly
yeah,
different dimension, but
yeah,
still
sure,
very much the same thing.
sure. Now I understand that. So as a result, uh, growing up, did they talk Black history in your family? Did they tell some of the stories? And when
Yeah.
did you get appreciation for Black history as you have?
I learned a lot about family history and the history, of my mom's family and kind of community history. Once I left Miami and once I went off to college, it in retrospect, it didn't feel like this is Black history, right? It wasn't presented that way. And so it could have been that when I was sitting in that class and the teacher is like, tell us a story from Black history, I'm like, what are you talking about?
Okay.
I can tell you about my family, right? I can tell you about my church. I can tell you about my community. I can tell you about people in Miami but it wasn't framed like that. And so it was really in college that and let me back up a little bit. I was always interested in history. My mother's a historian.
Oh, okay,
My
okay,
mother is a historian, and of course, I
okay.
married a historian, so we're
But
just
your
the
mother's a
history
historian because she
family.
taught history. Is that what you mean? She's a
She
historian?
taught history. She
Okay.
was a social studies specialist, so she
Oh, okay.
designed history curriculum.
Okay. Okay.
And she founded a community archives in Miami.
Oh,
So
okay.
we and the community archives was founded probably the year my sister is 2 years older, almost 2 years older than I am, probably the year between my sister and I.
Okay.
So we grew up with it, right? We
I
grew up
love
with
it.
mom not only working for the school system, but running this community organization out of our house for much of our
Oh,
childhood.
oh,
So again, I didn't, for some reason, it felt different when I got to college and really got into Black history and thought of it as Black history and not just family and community. And that community was Miami, right? Not, it was
yeah,
Bahamians in Miami. It was African. It was Miami. I
yeah.
don't know. I felt like I knew less about sort of the larger scope of African American
So
history.
when did it click that I'm gonna get a doctorate in history? How does someone think I can make a living in history? I mean, other than teaching and maybe writing a book that goes well. When how does that become your path?
So because mom was a historian and she was working in the school system and she, had she did a lot of projects and events and she would bring people in to town to speak to the students or to speak to the teachers. I got to meet a lot of people, right? I got to meet Maya Angelou. I got to
Oh,
meet John Hope
really?
Franklin.
Really?
I got to talk to people and I was very inquisitive. I was very inquisitive
I got you.
and I would take advantage of those opportunities. I'll give you an example. Dr. Dan Williams lived on our street. He at the time was the archivist at Tuskegee. And his sister actually lived on our street. And so Dr. Williams came home to his sister's house every break. And we'd be driving home and I'd say, "Oh, Dr. Dan is home." I'd go in the house, get my notebook, walk down to his sister's house, knock on the door.
Yeah, 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 yeah,
"Hi,
yeah,
it's Etta.
yeah.
I just wanted to update you on my latest thoughts about graduate school." So I was surrounded by people who I saw making a living doing history.
Uh,
They were historians, they were archivists, they were professors. I was raised to think I was going to go to law school. My dad is an attorney, was an attorney. He's retired now, and he was a sole practitioner. So my sister and I were raised that we were going to take over dad's law firm. And from those experiences, I decided I don't want to do that. That's boring.
oh, really?
I
Okay.
love history and I'm going to write history books.
Oh, okay. What was your dissertation on?
My dissertation was on rice farmers in pre-colonial Upper Guinea Coast in the early pre-colonial period. And it uses a methodology called historical linguistics to try to understand the development of rice growing, the history of rice, the history of the development of this technology from the words of the people in the region.
So evidently you had to travel and interview him and to do that type of research. That's fun. I would think I'm saying it on your behalf. That's got to be fun though to
Yeah.
go there and then first of all to map out because when you do your research, I think this is my question. How do you start research?
Oof.
Yeah.
I usually start research by reading and by reading what has already been written. Um,
Okay, let me stop you
and
there. Excuse me for this. How do you pick a topic then to start the research? Let's go there. Let's go to the beginning of it.
yeah, that's a hard question. I feel like the topic has to pick you, you know,
Ah,
and it
okay.
really has, there has to be something about it. If you think about it, for example, it took me 3 years to write Cumby, and it took me maybe 9 years to research it. That's a lot of time.
Yeah, that's 12 years.
Well, no, the writing and the last part of the research happened at the
Oh, at the
same
same
time.
time. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, I was
okay.
writing and researching. But it's a lot of time, and so it has to be something that you're passionate about. It has to be something that really moves you for you to be able to focus on it for that long period of time. Um, and so over, taking courses in graduate school, doing a lot of reading, thinking about my own research papers, rice is something that just really interested me because the broader focus of what I was interested in is West Africa's relationship to the African diaspora, particularly looking at the Gullah Geechee in coastal South Carolina and Georgia, and how the Gullah Geechee, what is Gullah Geechee and how does it form and how does it change over time? Just who are the Gullah Geechee and what is the relationship of this language and culture and people to West Africa? So, and rice is like the window through which I wanted to look at all of that. This rice growing technology, which was developed in West Africa and then transmitted from West Africa to the South Carolina and Georgia Low Country and is an important part of Gullah Geechee language, culture,
Let,
people.
let me ask you this. When you did the research, was that something that you may say you could take credit for that you found no one else had heard?
Yeah. I think there's a lot. I
Yeah,
mean, my dissertation, it's all original finds.
yes,
Um, and that's really the goal of that kind of research is to find
yes,
something that nobody else has
yes,
or to think about the topic, the sources in a way that no one else has thought about
exactly.
it before.
Because I've been to a rice farm, and
Hmm.
one of the things that, and we're going to go into the combi for sure. One of the things is the threat of the of cultivating the rice from the snakes, the alligators, the
Hmm.
insects. How brutal was rice farming in the Low Country to the enslaved people?
It was incredibly brutal. And that was something that having written my first books in West Africa and then sort of pivoting and thinking about the other side of the Atlantic, right? The Low Country. In West Africa, rice is grown for subsistence and it was grown by family labor. So you didn't work your family members to death and people didn't live so close to the rice fields, which is which are infested with the snakes and the alligators, also mosquitoes, right?
Yeah, yeah,
And mosquitoes which are carrying malaria. And so malaria is a part of people's everyday life. People live with malaria. Um, but rice cultivation in West Africa during the pre-colonial time, it just was a lot less deadly than it was in the Low
sure,
Country.
sure.
So the chronic malaria would shatter people's immune systems. So if a child survived their first year, okay, and many did not, the majority don't survive the first year, but if they did
Really?
survive the first year, then they would develop chronic malaria. And as they got to adulthood, if they made it past 15 was the next milestone, and the majority of children died before they were 15. Um, then something like upper respiratory illness, upper respiratory disease would just kill an otherwise healthy adult because their immune system had been shattered by chronic malaria. It meant that women were giving birth to babies of low birth weight who then failed to thrive, and many of them dying before, they complete their first year of life. So it made people very sickly, and unable to fight other kinds of illness.
When you wrote about that, and then you wrote about the next topic, and I'm not saying this is the in chronicle order the next topic, but what we're going to talk about in terms of Harriet Tubman.
Hmm.
Were you saying, in some respects, the rice thing was so devastating to you personally to hear of the stories of what they went through that maybe I'm going to find a victory and something a little lighter on my mind? Is there something like that you go through?
That
Says, oh,
is
is that
that
part of
is
it
a
too?
very interesting question. And you're very close to the truth. So I had an experience in 2013, I believe, where I mentioned where my father was born and where his family is from. A long story short, but I went looking for the family cemetery, and our family patriarch, then left me in charge of the cemetery. And when I went to find the cemetery, it was in awful shape. And long story short, one of our graves was broken open, and my ancestors' skeletal remains were floating at the top. And this was on a rice plantation in the South Carolina and Georgia Low Country. So here I was writing about rice, right? And writing about whether it was peasant rice farmers or slaves on rice plantations forced to grow rice, writing about it in a very theoretical way for an academic audience. And I couldn't do that anymore after that experience. So that experience took me, as I said, he left me with this responsibility. And for the Fields family, I then had to find our ancestor and try to find out more about where we were buried. And our ancestor was Hector Fields. That's all we knew. So, in the course of trying to find Hector, my great 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 grandfather, I learned that he was a Civil War veteran. And on the side, I was writing another book, and I was thinking about whether or not I should change the topic of the book and write this book about the Combahee River Raid. So I'm doing the research for what becomes Combahee on one track, and I'm doing family research on another track. I had like 8 tracks. I had multiple projects going at the same time, and I thought they were all separate. And in looking for Hector, I not only found out that he fought in the raid, but I also found the sources, which are the backbone of Combahee. And I developed a methodology that I use to tell the story.
Okay, so for the people to know, you're doing this as a professor, and this is during your sabbaticals. Is that when that happens, or you're teaching, and then in the summer you're doing this?
I'm
How does that work in
no,
life?
I research and write year round. So I teach, and while I'm teaching, I'm doing research, or while I'm teaching, I'm writing. Um, and like I said, at that time, I had three projects. I had the book, which became Combahee, but it wasn't Combahee. It wasn't Combahee for a long time. I was trying to figure out the story I wanted to tell and how to tell a story. I was working, collaborating with an artist, a classical music composer whose father is also from the Gullah Geechee corridor. And I wrote a text and he wrote a symphony based on that text. And then I was working on my family research, and I was collaborating with a group of scientists. So I was working on all of this while I'm teaching. Um, and I'm a wife and I'm a mother
Yeah,
and,
yeah, yeah.
all
Sure,
my
sure, sure.
a daughter, all my
Yeah.
various identities and
Wow.
responsibilities. Yeah.
Well, okay. Tell us the comedy story.
So Harriet Tubman is comes down to Beaufort, South Carolina in May of 1862. And she was sent down to be a spy for the U.S. Army
Excuse
Department of
me,
the
I
South.
got to stop you there right quick. Okay, let's back up.
Yes,
Harriet Tubman she's already started doing this Underground Railroad stuff at this point.
yes.
Start there and then this. Okay, go ahead.
Okay. So Tubman was born enslaved in the Maryland Eastern Shore, 1820, around 1822.
Yeah,
And she grows up in bondage. In 1849, she liberated herself and she went to Philadelphia. And from 1849 to about 1859, right before the Civil War starts, maybe 1860, she made it's been documented 13 trips, maybe more, 13 trips back into the Maryland Eastern Shore, the region, if not the neighborhood, if not the plantation where she was held in bondage. And she rescues about 70 enslaved people, personally brings them out and takes them to freedom. She also gave instructions for more people, and about 70 of those people used the instructions Tubman gave them and got themselves to freedom. While she is on the Underground Railroad, and this is when she was the most famous conductor of the Underground Railroad, she also is back and forth to the north, Philadelphia, Massachusetts, upstate New York, and Canada.
right.
And she becomes an important part of abolitionist communities. So she would work, she would raise money in the north, and then she would take that money and she would go back to Maryland and she would bring people out of slavery. Some of them were family members, community members, friends, people from neighbors, people from that area where she was from in the Maryland Eastern Shore.
I got to stop you there. This is the one here. You said she would work. Did they have an idea what she did for a living for work?
Yeah. When she was in Philadelphia, she was mainly, and Cape May, New Jersey, she was mainly working in hotels. So she's
Really?
mainly as a domestic in
Okay.
hotels.
Okay.
Yeah. And it's interesting because as an enslaved woman, she didn't want she refused basically to be a house slave. That was one of her first acts of resistance, refusing to learn how to weave and then refusing to learn how to be a maid because she wanted more autonomy.
When she made some money, and then what did she need the money for when she was conducting the Underground Railroad? You got to
She
buy food. You got to buy
she had to
lodging.
bribe people.
Oh,
She had
man.
to bribe people to get information. She had to pay for information. She had to pay people to be quiet.
Oh, yeah.
Sometimes she needed, if she was traveling, sometimes she's traveled with some infants, right? And so she bought pharmaceuticals to give the infants to keep them quiet.
I
One
see.
time she was traveling with her parents, her elderly parents. So she had to acquire like a carriage, something for them to ride in. They couldn't walk. They couldn't walk 60 some miles. So
Yes, I
she had
see.
to have something for them to ride and horses and that kind of thing. So sometimes she took the train It's like each trip was different, and the
I
logistics
see.
of each trip would call for different things.
I got you. So but if can we say this though? If she didn't go deep in the South, so she went to like the Maryland area, and then all she
Right.
had to do was get them up to Philadelphia mostly, and then she could say you're on your own, or this is what you do, and then she would go to wherever she had to go. Was that kind of the part of the? Do you think?
Well, sometimes she was reuniting families, so they already had family members.
Yes,
Sometimes these are members of her own family. You think it's only 60 some miles, but they were on foot. They were traveling during the winter. They were traveling for the most part at night. Um, there were dogs that would be sent out to try to sniff them out,
yes,
and
yes.
apprehend them. There were a lot of dangers,
I got you.
and people who attempted this froze to death, or they got frostbite, or they starved to death. I mean, it was it was a lot.
I got you.
Yeah, it was a lot.
So now she's done this a few times, and then where does the Cumbie part come in?
She did it 13 times,
Right.
and then she was back in Massachusetts uh, after the war broke out. And there was a battle in South Carolina in November 1861 called the Battle of Port Royal. And long story short, the U.S. Navy drove its armada up this body of water in coastal South Carolina. And they took out two forts. And then the U.S. Army came behind them and occupied Beaufort, Port Royal, and the Sea Islands. 8,000 enslaved people were no longer in bondage, right? They became contrabands of war, which meant that the U.S. Army was not going to return them to the enslavers because the enslavers would then exploit their labor to benefit the Confederacy and not the Union. So the Union was like, we'll keep them, we'll put them to work, and their work can benefit the Union. So there were a couple hundred Northern abolitionists who came down to help these freedom seekers adjust to freedom. They worked as teachers, missionaries, they organized labor on the Sea Island cotton plantations. They were doctors, shopkeepers. They just kind of came down. And if you can imagine running this a refugee project with thousands of people and people who are still in bondage who are escaping and coming. So that 8,000 becomes 10,000, it becomes 12,000. So it's all being run by the federal government and staffed by Northern volunteers. Some of these people were people Harriet Tubman had worked with in the 1850s when she was on the Underground Railroad. So it's in this context that the governor of Massachusetts sent Harriet Tubman down to be a spy. He thought that she could help the Union with the freedom seekers who were coming off of the Confederate plantations. They're coming into Beaufort. They're coming to the Sea Islands. They're seeking refuge, and they have information, right? They have information about what they saw before they left. They're forced to work, they're forced to carry, they're forced to serve. They knew the Confederate troop strengths, they knew their movements, they knew where the armaments were, they knew all of that. And that's what the Union needed.
Was that spot the Combie spot or what have you a huge significant a Confederate fort area or something like that that had to be overtaken?
The Combie was about 40 miles from Beaufort, and this is a rice growing region. This was a region where people were still in bondage. And by the time the Combie raid took place, the U.S. Army, the U.S. military is enlisting Black troops. So they had intelligence that there were still people on these plantations in bondage because after that raid, many of the slaveholders evacuated and they evacuated the slaves. Okay. But the people on these seven plantations were still there. They were still being forced to work. They were still being forced to plant rice and try to get out another crop. So they knew the slaves were there. They knew the rice was there. They knew that the Confederates were using the rice to export, feed their troops, and feed their civilians. So they went up to take all that out.
Where does the name Combi come from?
The Combahee River or the
Oh,
name?
okay. Oh no, I'm
Well,
just saying. Okay, that's where it comes
yeah.
from.
Well,
Okay.
no, the title of the book comes from an old lady, old Leah, who was in the refugee camp where the Combahee Freedom Seekers were taken after the raid. And there was a teacher from Boston who ran the school on the refugee camp, and she wrote about the Combahee people. And I'm tracking Combahee people, the people who escaped in the raid from slavery into freedom. And she writes about this lady, old Leah, and she's like, I've never seen anything like it. She's knitting while she walks. She's got a bucket on her head. She's got thread in there. She spun the thread herself. She's walking and she's knitting. And I heard that she uses that thread and she sews up all the soldiers' uniforms. So the teacher follows her one day and asks her, how did you learn all this stuff? And old Leah says, oh, ma'am, we's Combee. We didn't have white folks around. And I, I talked about how growing the rice made the environment deadly with malaria, which killed white people. So they left by mid-May and they stayed away until the end of November. They did not live there. So the people in these rice plantations were left to grow the rice by themselves, organize their own labor. She said, we didn't have white folks around all the time. We learned to do for ourselves. We's
Mm.
Combee. So that's where the title comes from. But people from the region pronounce the name of the river the same. It's Combee. It's not Combahee or I hear all kind of stuff.
I got you. I got you.
And I tell people it's Combee in the book title and then it's Combee for the river.
What going back to what Harriet Tubman did, what did she do in that
Okay.
raid? Yes.
So before the raid, Tubman okay, first of all, she recruited, she trained, she commanded a group of spies, scouts, and pilots. These are formerly enslaved men who knew the waterways and they knew the land. Um, with her spies, scouts, and pilots, she's like the chief spy. They infiltrated the Confederate plantations. They found the enslaved men who were forced to lay torpedoes on the Combahee River. They took the men back to where the torpedoes were on the river, and then the U.S. Army, probably the 3rd Rhode Island Heavy Artillery, which were white soldiers, two batteries of white soldiers, they went back and they diffused and removed the torpedoes. And this opened the river up to the U.S. Army boats. We know that during the raid, Tubman was on the gunboat with her spy scouts and pilots, Colonel James Montgomery, who was the commander of the raid. They were in the pilot houses.
He's
S
white.
He's white. He's
Yes.
a white abolitionist from Kansas. Um, so they drove, her spy scouts and pilots drove the boat and they piloted Colonel James Montgomery and the 2nd South Carolina Volunteers and the 3rd Rhode Island Heavy Artillery up the river. When Tubman got there, she was on a rowboat She went out to one of the plantations, probably Bonnie Hall, and these rowboats were sent out to the more distant plantations to bring the freedom seekers home. She burned buildings. She went to burning buildings, one of the teachers wrote. And we know that she went to the slave cabins and she told the people to come on to freedom. Now, when they got back to the rowboat, there were so many people. And a rowboat is a rowboat, it's not the big U.S. Army gunboat or the transport steamer. These were small wooden boats to take people back to the U.S. Army boat. And people were holding on because there was no space for them and they didn't want the boat to leave without them. Colonel Montgomery told Tubman, Moses, sing to the people, calm them down, sing to the people. She did. She sang an abolitionist song, and the people let go of the rowboats, and the rowboats were able to leave. Um, Tubman, when the boats sailed all night, went back to Beaufort and arrived in the morning, and the Cumbie Freedom Seekers paraded down the street, 756 people from the largest slave rebellion in U.S. history. And because of the battle that took place in 1861, there were Black people in downtown Beaufort who had been free since November 1861. They had jobs, they had homes, they had reunited their families. Everybody turned out that morning to see these people who were straight out of the rice fields. And when you read the newspaper accounts, it describes they're practically naked, okay? And they're emaciated, they're disabled, they're injured, they're sick, they're in really, really poor physical health. But they paraded down the main street in Beaufort because they had their freedom, right? The pride with which they paraded down Beaufort, their beaming with pride was also reported about. They went to a church, and in that church, which is Tabernacle Baptist Church, Harriet Tubman gave a speech, and it's the only recorded, we don't have a transcript of the speech, but it's the only place that we know she actually gave a public lecture and she told her stories about her freedom stories. Um, in that church, 150 of the men age 15 to 70 enlisted in the 2nd South Carolina Volunteers. I did say 70. They were examined and then they were taken to muster in.
When she went down there, did was there ever any battle? The guns shoot at the Confederates that were any of the white people that were still left on the plantations, or it was just we here, come on.
No,
Was
there were skirmishes. There were skirmishes during the raid. Um, the Confederates had reassigned the troops because it was the sickly season. It was that time of year when there was malaria, right? And so the troops were sent elsewhere, but they still had guards on the river. They had pickets on two sides of the river. Those pickets called for reinforcements, and once the reinforcements came, there were skirmishes. The gunboat on the north end of the river really ended it because it positioned itself to command the river and shoot down at the Confederates. Um, and so, yes, Black men and the abolitionists, the soldiers from Rhode Island, there was fire. They engaged in fire. You
mm,
know, there there was an ambush. They ambushed on the lower southern portion of the river. They
I got you.
ambushed
All
one
right.
group of reinforcements. So they engaged in battle. They engaged in battle.
Is it said that Sister Harriet might have got a gun and shot at somebody or something like that? Cause she bad. Did she
She
shoot at somebody and say,
and
"I got one"?
we know that she usually did carry a gun.
Yeah.
I haven't found any evidence that talks about her carrying or her shooting at anybody in the Combahee River raid, but we do know from there's a letter from a teacher from Boston, Massachusetts, says that she went to burning buildings, right? She participated in the destruction of this institution of slavery, on this plantation and in this region.
Did do you have a copy of the book there?
I do. Give me one
You got a minute.
second.
We plugging. We plugging.
Yeah. So here it is.
Yes. And that's the picture of the lady who
Yes. That is Tubman.
in the middle or on to the right, the little smaller with the,
Both.
okay, that's both Tubman. Okay.
This is Tubman as there's a woodcut of her that was done during the Civil War. And
Okay.
so this is an image of the woodcut.
Okay.
And she's got a rifle and wearing a U.S. Army blue coat.
Okay.
And then this is the picture of Tubman, I think, that's probably most iconic. She's an elderly woman and she has a white shawl around her, sort of draped over her head and around her shoulders. So, what the artist William H. Johnson did, this is his interpretation of these two iconic images of Harriet Tubman at two very different stages of her life. And he's an African American artist who was painting during the Depression.
I got you.
Yep.
Uh, just a couple more. How old was would you say Harriet was in the Comey raid?
She would have been about 41 years old.
Okay.
Hmm.
And as a result of that, being in the armed forces, she got some of the privileges, those benefits that might have come with it.
Well, many people don't know Tubman remarries after the war. She remarried a Civil War veteran who was, though he was a lot younger than her, he died before her. So
Hmm.
she first gets a widow's pension from her second husband, Nelson Davis. And then once she's pensioned, she begins to try to get compensation for her own military service. And she succeeds after several years and a lot of waiting and I'm sure money to get an increase. So she was pensioned at $12 a month as a widow. She gets a total of $20 a month, and she's pensioned for her service as a nurse. She was never compensated for her work as a spy or a scout.
Oh, really? Just a couple more weeks for the clock. When you started that book, you didn't. And this is a question. I'm saying it wrong. Did you start it thinking it was going to be about Harriet, or it actually started about your family being in Cumbia and the rice farmers, and then it took life of its own, or what was that direction?
When I started it, it was really about when I started it, it was really about rice.
Right,
And then it became about the Gullah Geechee.
right.
And as I was sort of thinking about those two things and doing research, that's when I encountered, if you will, the Combahee River Raid.
All right, I got
And then I thought, what's been written about this? Oh, nothing's been written about this. Is there any there? Could I actually write a book about this one raid?
you. Right.
Um, and so as I really dug in to figure out if there was a story there to be told and if there were sources with which to tell it, then I discovered my family connection.
Oh, really?
Yes,
Oh,
yes,
and that was earth shattering in itself, then, I'm sure.
it was.
Yeah.
Because as I looked for Hector and as I looked through the U.S. Civil War pension files, that's when the book really started I don't want to say it come together because it still had many years before it actually came together. But
Yeah,
that was the core of it.
yeah.
That was the core.
Is there a chapter in there about Hector?
There's not a chapter. I open the foreword. I talk about Hector, the forward and the afterword.
I got you.
I talk about Hector, and because Hector did not have a pension file, I talk about his brother Jonas Fields. We were able to find his siblings and their parents, and his brother, younger brother, Jonas Fields, also was a Civil War veteran, and he did get a pension and has a very thick pension file that told me a lot of things about our family that we did not know.
Okay, just a couple more because we jamming. I know I got to stop. But Hector and them were not enslaved in that area. They were in the military. Is that
Well, see, this is the part that, again, we did not know because Dad's family lives now in Colleton County, right? That's where Daddy was born. But what we found out is that Hector and his siblings and his parents were actually from Beaufort. So Hector is one of the enslaved people who escaped after the Battle of Port Royal, November
I see.
1861.
I
He
see.
escapes sometime after that battle.
I see.
And then he joined the 2nd South Carolina Volunteers in March of 1863. So my grandfather's family, the Fields family, is actually not from the rice plantations.
I got you.
They're from Beaufort, where the Port Royal experiment happened. My grandmother's family, the Frasers and the Richards, they are from that Cumbie area, but those plantations were a little bit inland. I mean, they're like next door to
Mm,
one of the plantations that was raided. They're literally next door, but they were owned by a different family, and that family of enslavers evacuated the people they held in bondage after the Battle of Port Royal. So they were not there. They were not there when the Cumbie raid took place,
I
and they
got you.
stayed in bondage until the end of the war.
Your initial responsibility was to go to help with the cemetery. Have you done any of that? Whatever happened with that
Yes, yes, I
responsibility?
have.
That's the question. I mean, like you saw
So,
the body floating. Did you close the
yes,
casket up? And
the family came together and we
yeah,
repaired the grave because the top of the grave was broken.
yeah.
So we repaired that. We are in the process of working with an archaeologist to map the cemetery and to create a plan for the cemetery. And the land is privately owned, right? We don't own the land. So we're working with the landowner um, to restore the cemetery, to map it. We don't know how many graves are out there. Many of them, particularly the Fields graves, but many of them are not marked, right? The majority of the Fields family's graves are not marked. But we know we're there because our family patriarch and other family members told us, and I was able to find some of our death certificates, right? Death certificates for family members who died in the 1950s up until the 70s that show that they're buried at that cemetery. In that
Hmm.
area of South Carolina, Black people didn't have death certificates before the 1950s. So that's been as far back as we've been able to go, but we can show that we were there, we are there. Yeah, so we are making progress on that. The family's making progress.
When we spoke before, is there a day? I know there is that should be honored in the Combi Raid. The day it started, the day it
Yeah.
ended, and is that a day that if people were to go to celebrate that, and is there a festival there? You and I talked about that. That's kind of
Yeah. So the day is really June 2nd. That's Freedom Day. That's the day that the boats arrive on the Combie, on the plantations, and the people get on the boats and go to freedom. They leave Beaufort on the 1st at night, and then they arrive back in Beaufort in the morning on the 3rd. So
Okay.
personally, I celebrate from the 1st to the 3rd.
Okay. Okay.
And there
Okay.
are a bunch of festivals down there. There is a Harriet Tubman Freedom Festival,
Oh,
I think,
really?
and it's in June. It's
Yeah.
not on the Combie. There's really nothing to date on the Combie commemorating the anniversary of the Combie
Oh, is
raid.
that right? It's good. Should that be a historical marker there or something like that?
We are working on that, and we had a lot of discussions about it when I was finishing Combie, and now I've been on the road with Combie, and now, of course, the National Park Service, with all of the changes to the federal government. Um, it's
Yeah.
really
Yeah.
the National Park Service and the National Park Service Underground Network to Freedom that I am working with. So we were emailing last night. We're going to try to keep things going
Yeah.
um, under these difficult conditions.
Yeah. Sure. Well, I always ask everybody, is there a question I have not asked you? Is there anything that comes to mind
Ooh,
in this regard? Because I
I
know
would,
we got more books that we could talk about later date, but
yeah,
I mean, in general.
I would like people to think about the U.S. Civil War pension files and to find out if they have a family member, and you do this by going back to the 1870 census, if you have a family member who has a pension file. If you do, I would encourage you to get a hold of it and to see what history, what treasures it may tell you about your family. I was able to get Jonas Field's pension file, learn the names of Hector Fields' siblings and their parents. These are my great, 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 great grandparents, where they were enslaved, who the enslavers were, how the family got separated before the war. My aunt was given away as a wedding gift, and how they got separated during the war. After the Battle of Port Royal, the enslavers sent the male slaves to one state, the female slaves to another, separated Jonas from his wife. The wife became mentally ill and they never lived together again. And
Hmm.
I learned the names of other people who grew up in bondage with Jonas Fields. And I learned how Hector and Jonas got to Colleton County from Beaufort after the war, right to the place where my dad's family still lives. So these pension files are a gold mine. And what I do in Cumbie, I got the pension files of the two regiments formed after the raid, and I put the Cumbie community back together, right? I recreated this enslaved community and I traced them from slavery into freedom.
Are you a scholar?
Yes.
That's what I'm thinking. Yeah, that sounds scholarly. I mean, the expert and all that other stuff. That's what it sounds like. Because you on to something big in history, American history, and Black history in particular. Everybody, this is what I do here: strong inspirations. I told you you're gonna like this one. This is serious stuff here. No question about it. Hit the subscribe button. It's free. Hit the like button. There is no love button, but I know you loved it like I did. Hit the notifications bell. You get a ding, a shock, smoke signal, something to let you know there is new content. And tell somebody about Strong Inspiration. Don't keep it to yourself. You sitting there, you at the bar and everything, telling everybody all this you know, and don't tell them where you get it from. Act like you read it. You saw it here from the people who wrote it. How about that? You shortcut this situation. To you, everybody go to my website, businessintheblack.net, get your copy of the book, watch the movie, hear where I'm speaking at. Do you have a website a list of where you are speaking engagements so people can come and see you?
I do. You can go to www.ettafieldsblack.com and go to my events page, and that'll show you up to date where I'm speaking.
Yep, yep. Yeah, you got to do that. It's good stuff too. Everybody do those things. And to you, my sister, I say this and I mean this with all sincerity. I want you to stay strong, stay safe, stay on your grind. I love who you become out of Miami, where the weather was warm year round. It's a little different at home, but nonetheless, you had all that advantage. You had all them nationalities that you took something from. You had that mom and dad, but mom in particular, the historian, incite that inside of you. And
Mhm.
you took it to the next level, I would suspect, to getting
Thank you.
that doctorate. And when you wrote the paper, they didn't even read it, said, come on over, you good enough, we understand. And now you a scholar, you're ahead of the class on top of all the other people in many respects because you found your niche with this story and the others that you've written about. I will have you back on. Let's talk some more because I know we didn't cover it all by not just this but others that you stories. And it's a beautiful thing.
Thank you.
I appreciate this.
Thank you
So
very much.
with that, I'll say bye bye. We out.
Thank you.
Thank you.